Greetings and salutations, Greek students. We continue our study of the Greek language with an examination of participles, and in particular, we're going to look at examples of how to translate participles. Now, we're focusing here on the present active participle. So, as we've learned, participles are verbal adjectives, meaning they can function like verbs and they can function like adjectives. So I'm going to draw out some examples from N. Clayton Croy's A Primer of Biblical Greek, the Practice and Review sentences, to illustrate how do I translate these participles when I come across them in the wild. So let's get right into it, looking at Lesson 18. The sentence is sentence number 3. Tate hoi apostoloi di erkanta diates geis kerusantes kai euangelizomenoi to lao. So we have here tate, the conjunction, then hoi apostoloi, nominatives plural, the apostles, and di erkantai. This is from di erkomai. And so what we see here is that the di erkomai, the epsilon here is lengthened to an eta, and that should be ringing red lights. Remember, we can't forget how imperfects and aorist work. So when we see that lengthening, that eta there, we know that we're looking at either an imperfect or we're looking at a second aorist. And this is not a second aorist because erkomai in the second aorist becomes elthon. And so this is also on sa omai etai anta, or in the imperfect omein u eta amatha este anta. This is the imperfect middle passive third person plural. So the apostles were welcoming, not welcoming. De erkomai is to go through. We're going through, and we're not doing it as a passive because in that omai ending, we know that this is a deponent verb. So the apostles were going through tes geis, the land. And then we have kerusantes. This is from the verb keruso, I preach, I proclaim, and euangelizomai, euangelizomai, which is the verbal form of euangelizo, or euangelion, gospel, to proclaim the gospel, to gospelize, which isn't really a verb, but it's a good way to communicate this idea. So we have two participles. Here, euangelizomai, we have the present middle passive participle, and kerus antes, we have the present active participle. Now, as with participles, because they're verbal adjectives, we have to pay attention to the case, the number, and of course, the gender of these participles. So when we see kerus antes, we have to look at our chart and know, oh, this is a nominative. This is a nominative plural masculine participle. So nominative plural masculine, and that's antes ending. It's not own, kerus own. It's not masculine singular. It's antes. So it's masculine plural nominative. So because it's nominative, we know that it's referring to our subject, right? Because participles agree with the nouns they're modifying in case, number, and gender. So the apostles were going through the land, and this is a circumstantial participle. While preaching and proclaiming to lao, to the people. So euangelizomai, this is also a masculine plural. It's middle passive participle. But again, this is a deponent verb, euangelizomai. So it's while preaching and while proclaiming to the people. And so this is an instance of the circumstantial participle. It's describing what's happening while the apostles are traveling through the land. They're preaching and they're proclaiming to the people. And that's how this is functioning. So this is the kind of more the verbal participle of the present active and present middle passive participles. Look at another example here, sentence number 14. Angeloi enegkan arton pras tas diokamenas adelphas hupa ton exousion. So this sentence, angeloi is our subject, nominative, plural, masculine, from angelos, angel or messenger. So we're going to say angels, enegka. This is a second aorist from Pharaoh, to bring, to bear. So they brought, third person plural, second aorist. So it's aorist, snapshot action, simple past. Angels brought arton, bread, pros, to, and to is going to, you get the accusative, tas diokamenas adelphas hupa ton exousion. So tas is the accusative feminine plural. And in this case, we have this participle, which is in the attributive position. Notice the definite article is right directly in front of the participle, and then we have a noun of the same case, number, and gender, feminine, accusative, plural. And so we would translate this as an adjective. To the sisters who are being persecuted by the authorities. And so this is a case, this is an instance where diokamenos, this is from the verb dioko, I pursue, I persecute. And since it's middle passive, this is a true passive participle. The sisters being persecuted, right? It's not the sisters persecuting the authorities, it's being persecuted. And as a contextual note, whenever you see hupa in the context of one of these middle passives, it's usually going to describe the agent of the action, which is, so the subject is the sisters, or really the noun being described is this, and I should say sisters, not sister. So angels brought bread to the sisters who are being persecuted, or the sisters being persecuted by the authorities. But this is a adjectival use of the participle. It's using the participle, the middle passive participle diakamenos, to describe which sisters are we talking about. We're talking about the sisters who are persecuted by the authorities. That's the present middle passive participle. Let's do one more example here. Sentence number 7. Ha pistuon theo kai ergodzamenos dikaiasunein ark thesetai, ak thesetai ace ton uranon. Ak thesetai ace ton uranon. Ark thesetai didn't make sense. So ha pistuon. This is from the verb pistuo. We've seen this for a long time. I believe. And when we have it here in the on ending, we see it in the nominative, singular, masculine, present active participle. And so we're going to say the one who believes, or because it's in the nominative, we could probably say the believer, but the one believing in God. Now, why in God? Because there's no preposition, but God, theo here, is in the dative case. And so it's that indirect object. It's the one to whom the believing is directed, the one believing in God. And ergodzamenos, this is from ergodzomai, I work, ergodzomai, working or even doing, the one believing in God, and we'll say working because it goes with the word ergon, work. It's the verbal form of the word ergon. The one working. Now, why am I doing working? Because this is deponent, right? Look, it's middle passive participle, also nominative, singular, masculine, middle passive participle. But the fact that it's middle passive speaks to its deponency, because it's from ergod's omai. So the one believing and working dikaiosunein, righteousness. And you might go, well, you can't do righteousness. Except you see Jesus saying precisely this in Matthew 6. Be careful, watch out for doing your righteousness before men, because they will see you and you will receive your reward. Instead, do your righteousness for your Father. So the ones believing, or the one, not the ones, not plural, the one who believes in God and the one working righteousness, ak thesatai. Now this is from ago, I lead. And what's happened is this thesatai is the future passive. Omai e etai, third person singular, will be led. Eis ton uranon, into heaven. And technically it's into the heaven, but in this case we probably would say into heaven. So the one believing in God and working righteousness will be led into heaven. So in this instance, we have the substantive use of the participle ha pistuon and ha ergodzamenos. This participle, or this definite article, is governing both the first participle and the second participle. That is, the one believing in God and working righteousness will be led. So the subject is the believing and working one, the believer in God and the worker of righteousness, will be led into heaven. So here we've seen the circumstantial participle, that is the participle that's functioning, it's describing what's happening while the main verb, dier kanta, is occurring. So that's the circumstantial participle. We see here the substantive use of the participles, that is the participle functioning like a noun. It's the subject of the sentence in chapter 7, in sentence number 7. And then lastly, of course, we see the participle functioning as an adjective, the attributive adjective. It's attributing a quality to the sisters. Which sisters? The persecuted sisters. So these are three separate examples of the syntax of the participle in the circumstantial participle, describing coterminous action with the main verb, the participle that is substantive, functioning like a noun, like an adjective sometimes does, and then of course the participle functioning like an adjective, describing a noun. And the reason is because participles are verbal adjectives.